All right. Hey, everybody. This is Mike D. I'm from the TPC training department. And what we're going to be talking to tonight is about IFR route planning, a little theory, and some hands-on exercises. Um, so we're going to go over what the agenda is, what kind of materials you'll need, some assumptions I'm going to make going into the training. We're going to talk about weather and IFR minimums, what kind of charts and symbology, basic symbology are on the charts, some different IFR altitudes. So maybe, if you haven't heard these terms before, like MIA, MOCA, AROCA, just to understand what they are and how that kind of plays into your IFR route planning, what stars, SIDS, and what preferred routing are, some airport information and procedures, and then also some notes about performance, fuel, and choosing an alternate airport. And then finally, we'll do like a walkthrough on if you've never filed a flight plan on VATSIM. We'll show you how to do that as well. So again, this is going to be hands-on. There's going to be some exercises that you guys are going to do. And then we'll have some discussion afterwards based on those exercises. So it's not just going to be me lecturing the whole time. So be prepared to get your hands dirty. So basically the objectives is to understand all the planning considerations and information you need to make an appropriate IFR flight plan. So the two exercises we're going to do tonight, these are the airports for Kilo Hotel Uniform Foxtrot to Kilo Sierra Delta Foxtrot using a low en route chart, which I'll explain what that is in a minute. And then the other airport that's listed there would be the exercise for the high en route chart. So if you guys got a piece of paper in front of you, if you want to write down those airport codes, that would be good. If not, I think I have them later on the slides as well, but you might as well jot those airport codes down as well. Some materials you'll need. So if anybody's using Skyvector or don't know what Skyvector is, just go to www.skyvector.com. It's a free chart that you can use. You can access basically all the different types of aviation charts that you need. If you have any of the paid programs, Navigraph or ForeFlight, you're more than welcome to use that as well. The FAA chart supplements, which will be available through Skyvector. We'll talk about where to get weather, aviationweather.gov, or another free one, 1-800-WEATHER BRIEF. And if you want to do more real world style planning, your pilot operating handbook and your weight and balance calculations as well. Anybody have any questions so far, or is it all pretty straightforward? All right, I'll take your silence as a no for no questions. So what I'm going to make some assumptions here, and forgive the slide, it should say IFR route planning. You know what an IFR capable aircraft is, you know how to fly it, and you know how to use some of the functionality in there, like the GPS and the nav radios. So we're not going to go through, how to use all those systems in an IFR equipped aircraft. Assuming you know the difference between VFR and IFR. Again, VFR is visual flight rules. IFR is going to be instrument flight rules, and that's going to be used when your ceilings are less than 1,000 feet AGL and or your visibility is less than 3 statute miles. So if you're looking either at your departure or destination airport and they tell you, let's say, for example, visibility is 1.5 miles, that means you're going to be flying under VFR rules if you're going to land IFR rules if you're going to be landing at that airport. If you were, let's say, flying somewhere and there was 10 statute miles of visibility and you're going to stay clear of the clouds, that's obviously VFR rules. ATC communications, if you're not comfortable with it or have questions about it, take a look at our essentials training course. Some basic weather theory, I'm assuming you know as well. So we're not going to go into all the different types of clouds and things like that. We're going to be focusing on fixed wing aircraft here as well. So we're not necessarily talking about helicopters or any other type of aircraft. We're just going to be talking primarily about fixed wing. All right, so quick overview of IFR. I spoke about that before. If the ceilings are less than 1,000 feet AGL above ground level and or your visibility is less than 3 statute miles, you're in IMC weather conditions, which means you're going to be flying under IFR flight rules. You can fly IFR in regular VMC conditions if you want to. Um, and then, especially with IFR, you have to follow the flight plan and follow the predetermined route clearance that you're given. There can be deviations, but they're only really for diversions, weather, and emergencies. So whatever you file in your flight plan in VATSIM, you should try to stick to that unless directed otherwise. And the clearance that you get, you have to follow those clearances. And then your minimum equipment, if you guys remember the acronym GRAB card, that's going to be your minimum equipment requirements that you need. Any questions on this so far? Everybody pretty good? Am I speaking Greek, or is it all making sense to everybody?
So far, so good.
So far, so good. Everybody's good? All right. And if you don't know, like, that's why we're here. This is a two-way conversation, so it's not just me babbling. So feel free to ask any questions. So let's get into the meat of it. You got two types of IFR charts. All right. So if we go on to Skyvector, and for anybody that hasn't used it, right, if I want to put in my flight plan, you go up here on the top left, I click on flight plan. I can put in my departure and destination airports, right? Those were the first two sets of airports that I used. And then you'll notice that you'll get the airport name that'll appear, and then you'll get this magenta line that appears that'll basically give you your route of flight. And then there's on the top right here, there's all different types of charts that you can cycle through. If you click on World VFR, this is the VFR sectional charts that are like the FAA sectional charts that you can take a look at. And then if you look at World Low, it's going to switch to something completely different. This is an IFR chart. If I scroll out a little bit more, I can also look at a World High chart. Okay. Does anybody know the difference? Let me ask this so I'm not just giving away the answer. Anybody know the difference between the World Low and the World High chart?
No.
Feel free to jump in.
Unless it's altitudes, that's the only I can think of.
All right, altitude. That's a good point. Let's go back to the slideshow. Okay, so low en route chart. This is for your flights below 18,000 feet MSL. And if you're below 10,000 feet MSL, you have a speed restriction. You have to be less than 250 knots indicated airspeed. So for your low en route chart, it's for 18,000 feet. I'm sorry, below 18,000 feet MSL. But remember, if you're below 10,000 MSL, you have a speed restriction of less than 250 knots. And there's basically two types of things that are going to be shown on your low en route chart. Two different types of routes, basically. You're going to have your Victor Airways, which are VOR based, and then you're going to have your T routes, which are RNAV only based routes. So if you want to take a look at that, if you guys type in those two airports and go to your world low chart, what is the number of the closest Victor Airway if I wanted to go direct between those two airports?
It looks like Victor 171.
Yep. So if everybody takes a look again at the magenta line that got formed here, if I want to take a Victor Airway, Victor 171, you have the big V, and then the black box that says 171 is going to be between that. And if you take a look near Terre Haute Regional, there's a VOR right here. Again, you have like that compass rose that's around the VOR, and you have the VOR symbol. And then if I follow that down, you're going to notice that there's another VOR that's close to my Louisville Muhammad Ali Airport as well. So there's basically two VORs that make up this Victor Airway over here. Which radial, if I was going from Terre Haute Regional, if I want to be on Victor 171, what radial would I need to fly out of Terre Haute Regional to fly Victor 171?
Let's see. 134.
Yep. So 134, right? It says it right here. So if you're going from Terre Haute Regional, I'm actually going to take off and I'm going to intercept the 134 outbound radial, right? And then I'd follow that on Victor 171. Now, this chart looks really busy, especially if you never looked at one of these before. There's all kinds of numbers everywhere. It looks like things can get really confusing, but we're going to get into some of that symbology in a minute. All right. So that's Victor Airways. The other thing is if you want to look at your RNAV routes, right? RNAV being GPS-based routes. Um, if you look at this T325, right, that's going to be your RNAV route. So it might go in between two VORs, but it doesn't necessarily follow that. So if you, because that's not required for an RNAV route. So if you take a look at this RNAV route, T325, you notice it starts at a VOR, but let's say if I followed it all the way south, I can go into Bowling Green down over here into Bowling Green, Warren County, and there's no VOR that I'm intercepting here. That's all based on GPS waypoints. And if you look at all these little kind of star symbols over here, like Lulo and Loon and all of those are going to be all of your RNAV points along the route. Okay. Does that make sense so far? Did I go too fast, or anybody have any questions on the difference between Victor Airways and an RNAV route and how to tell them the difference on the chart? Nothing? Okay.
That's a lot of info, dude.
No, it's a lot of info. All right. So again,
So normally I'm in the line between the two locations. That would be like a VFR magenta line you could follow, right? But if you're getting an IFR plan, that might give you a Victor Airways, what you're saying as an example, right? So you'd be
so
flying the
you
Victor
can
Airways instead of
go
the magenta line.
so you can go so we're going to talk about that. You can go off these Victor Airways or the RNAV routes. You don't necessarily have to take them, but these are like kind of predefined routes already. So if I wanted to do this, and what you can do in Skyvector is I can say I want to take in here in the box over on the bottom, I can say I want to take the Victor 171 route, right? So what it's going to do, it's going to tell me to fly to intercept the VOR first, and then it's going to put me on Victor 171. So now you notice my magenta line is on Victor 171, and I can
So
follow that all the way down.
you're probably going to get to this. So when you file that,
Mm-hmm.
just that flight plan right there, you're filing a Victor Airway, and the controller will just accept that or change that depending on what's going on.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
they know the Victor Airway. Yep, yeah, you can
cool.
say yep, you can do it that way. Um, so then, so it begs, we'll stick on this for a second. So that begs the question then, right? How long is this Victor? How long is this flight? How long is this Victor Airway? Um, you know, this whole segment, right? So if you look here underneath at the bottom number where it says 27, from this VOR station to Skodo, this point here is going to be 27 nautical miles, right? So that here, that first segment of my line is going to be 27 nautical miles. And then if I go from Skodo, right, this triangle symbol is a waypoint. If I go from Skodo all the way down to my next points, right, that's going to be 38 nautical miles. And then you're going to notice under here, there's another 30 for another 30 nautical miles, and that should add up to my entire trip. So the number underneath the Victor Airway is the nautical miles in between each of the different waypoints along your route. And you have the same thing with the RNAV, right? It's going to be the same exact pattern, that the number underneath is the distance. So under the T325 that I used as an example of an RNAV route, the 26 nautical miles is my distance, to this first waypoint, and then this from here to the next waypoint is going to be 66 nautical miles. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Again, it
What's
looks overwhelming. There's a lot of numbers, but it actually has like a whole logical order to it, which kind of makes sense, right?
What's the difference between the world low and the en route L-27?
Good question. I don't know.
Okay,
That
because
I'm
I
not
was
sure about. Yeah.
That's part of the TPP or the section, like a sectional. So if you zoom out, it looks like a sectional only.
Oh, got it. Yeah. This is the more of the sectional view. Gotcha. Yeah, world low and I think they just kind of tie everything together, right? Where it's just like one running map of like the whole, United States in this case, what I'm
I
looking
see.
at.
I see. I see. Yeah.
But if you want, oh, and that's a good point. If you guys don't know what anything means, obviously, just like
The
any other
margin, right?
chart, yeah, there's a legend all the way on the right. So, if you don't remember what any of these symbols mean, obviously there's a whole legend here on the right. Um, just like real world aviation, right? Sectionals, again, I know we kind of take this stuff for granted in the simulator. There's an effective date on the charts, right? So if you were flying this real world, you want to make sure you have the most up-to-date chart, and there's effective and end dates on the chart, which would be up here, and your information about the IFR. So, and it says right here for up to, but not including 18,000 feet MSL as well. All right. So the other part of it, so that's your world low charts. So then your world high charts, right? Let's say you want to fly, A320s and, things like that, right? You want to be somewhere where you can actually fly higher and don't have the speed restriction. That's what your high en route chart is going to be for. And that's for flights at or above 18,000 feet MSL. You're going to have jet routes, basically, which are high altitude Victor Airways. Same thing, VOR to VOR, just like we talked about, but that's going to be more specifically for jets at higher airspeeds. And you're going to have what they're called Q routes on the high en route chart, and that's again your RNAV only routing as well. But it's going to be the same concept, right? If I look at a jet route on the world high chart, right? So if I look at a jet route, I might have to take a different airport. I'm just randomly picking one. If I look at J89 right here on my screen, we'll kind of follow this out. You'll see it goes from uh, the boiler
Lafayette.
VOR BVT, and then we follow that all the way down. That's going to go into Louisville VOR over here. So this jet route is going to do something similar. It's VOR to VOR. And then the Q routes, which are going to be in blue, those are going to be your RNAV routes, and you're going to see like RNAV points along those routes as well. So like here, if I look at Q29, right, Side is one of my points here, kind of like in the star. That's going to be one of my RNAV routes. So taking a look at my screen, actually, since I got it in front of me, Q29, how long is this segment that I'm looking at on my screen? What's the nautical mile distance on this segment for Q29 that I got zoomed in?
227.
Yep, 227 nautical miles.
And that's between Thrice? No.
I'd have to
What are the
zoom
2
out a little
points?
bit. Yeah, it's here. We got
Oh,
Sela.
there's one right there, right in the middle there.
Yeah, yeah, Q29 here is Sela to this point, I think is Creep is 47. And then from Creep all the way down to, no, I think it's the next one, to Sade is 229 because it passes through that point. So yes, so you get the distance on the bottom, and then, like I said, you got the two different route types. Is everybody, just in terms of what the different charts are used for, is everybody okay with that? Do you need me to go through anything again? So just remember low and high, right? Low is for slower aircraft, less than 18,000 feet MSL, and below 10,000, you got the speed restriction that you got to fly less than 250 indicated airspeed. High en route, there's no airspeed restriction, and that's for 18,000 feet MSL and above. So all of your, you know, commercial aircraft is going to fly at the jet routes. At that altitude, they can fly either the jet routes, which are the, VOR to VOR, or they're going to fly the Q routes, which is RNAV only. There are unusable routes that are shown on the charts as well. I don't know if I have one here, or did I have one prepared? You'll basically see like a zigzag kind of line overlaying the route. So if you see like, I don't know if I have one here, I should have picked one out. It's basically if you see this type of symbology, which I'll just create it really quick. So if you have a route here, right? So let's say I was looking at Victor 512, and if you see something like this, basically like squiggly lines going through it like that, that means an unusable route. So there was a route that was published before, but it's no longer in use. So you're going to see a bunch of squiggly zigzag lines basically over the route. That means you should not use that route anymore. So that was a published route, but is not being used anymore. Any questions? Good to go?
So this may be a dumb question, but if when you choose between VOR and RNAV, is that just depending on where I'm going?
It depends on where you're going, and it also depends on the equipment in your aircraft, right? So if I'm using, an aircraft that's not RNAV enabled, right? If I don't have like a GPS system, maybe it's like an older aircraft for some reason, so you can't fly an RNAV route if you don't have like a functioning GPS that meets the requirements, right? So it all depends on what equipment you have and what's functioning as well within your aircraft.
So, and if I got both, then I'm just looking for this one goes directly where I'm going or closest to. That would.
Yes and no. The other thing that you would take into effect, let me show you maybe a difference. Yeah, you can see what goes more direct. The other thing that we're going to talk about with altitudes is generally the RNAV routes will let you go a lower altitude than the VOR routes, right? So think about it logically, right? So if I'm going between VOR and VOR, let's see if you guys can come up with the answer on this in terms of altitudes. If I'm flying this Victor 171, what do I have to ensure in terms of the altitude that I'm going to fly? What are some considerations that I need to have, or that I don't want my airplane to do if I'm flying between those two areas?
I mean, the altitude, that 2.6 there, 2,600 feet.
Well, if I'm flying any route, right, IFR, I can't see the ground, basically, right? I'm flying in the clouds. I can't see the ground. What are some things when somebody's going to come up with an appropriate altitude? What are some considerations that they need to take into account to make sure I'm going to have a safe flight?
Direction of flight.
East, west, yeah.
All right, so direction of flight's one of them.
Yeah.
Remember, you're in the clouds. You're flying over terrain. What else do we have to be careful of before to make sure we're going to have a safe flight?
1,000 feet above AGL.
Right. Well, I know you know it, Riley. Let's see let's see if everybody else can. Just think about it logically, right? I'm flying an airplane in the clouds. What are some things I want to avoid that could be dangerous for my aircraft that's going to get me in trouble or killed?
Mountains.
Mountains. All right. So we have obstructions, right? No, that's good.
Obstructions.
All right. So we want to be careful of obstructions. That's why we're going to pick an altitude. We want to do traffic avoidance, right? So we have to make sure we're not going to collide with other aircraft. I'm flying VOR to VOR. VOR is a radio-based navigation aid. What are some considerations maybe with my VORs that I'd have to be careful of or that I need to ensure?
How far between them can you actually pick up the signal?
There you go. Signal, right? So that's going to be, can I get a signal, right? Any other considerations? We have obstruction, traffic avoidance, signals. Obstructions, obviously, we're talking about, terrain, mountainous terrain as well. So those are the main ones, right? So signal is not really going to be an issue if I'm flying RNAV or GPS, right? Remember, VORs are only line of sight, right? So if I'm here, let's say I wanted to fly from route A to route B, right? And let's say I got a mountain here, a little bit of a mountain here, and my airport is over here, right? And let's say my starting airpoint is here, my destination airport is here. If I'm flying a VOR, and let's say each airport has a VOR as well, right? I want to make sure I'm at an altitude, which is probably going to be a lot higher because VORs are line of sight, right? So I'm going to have to be a lot higher up to get a VOR signal, whereas if I'm in a GPS equipped aircraft, right, I really only have to worry about the obstructions and not crashing into, these mountains. So maybe I can fly at this flight level over here because I'm not concerned about getting a VOR signal. I got GPS, right? So generally with the VORs and the VOR routes, you're going to have to fly a higher altitude to ensure that you're going to get that radio reception from the VORs. Whereas your GPS or RNAV enabled flying, I'll just call this RNAV, you can generally fly at lower altitudes. And you're going to see that on the charts, right? So if I take a look now on my VOR, actually, we'll skip ahead. We're going to go into these different altitudes and what they mean over here. So these altitudes, there's a 10,000, and then there's a star next to one of them and a 3,000. So these altitudes mean two different things. So we're going to actually talk about that. Let's go back to altitudes. So we did talk about that, right? We said, what do we need? We need obstacle avoidance, reliable nav signal, and a collision avoidance. There's a great, if you've never heard these terms before, a MIA, MOCA, AROCA, there's actually a really great, demonstration here from Flight Insight. I could DM this to everybody as well. It basically goes through what all of these different altitudes mean and what basically has like these like little slideshow things going on, which is a great way to explain this. And let me just do a quick screen capture so we can talk through it. All right. So what you're going to have in this, let's say Victor 298. Can you guys see this, or is this a little bit too small? And do I need to zoom in?
I got it.
You good? All right. So there's two different altitudes, right? There's going to be the MOCA, which is your minimum obstructance clearance altitude, and that's going to have the asterisk in front of it. And then the MIA, which is going to be the top number, and I'll just label it MEA up here, right? That's going to be your minimum en route altitude. So I'm just going to put en route so you guys can see that, but it means minimum en route altitude, right? So what's the difference between these two? Besides Riley, because I know Riley knows this. Anybody else want to guess why is there two different altitudes here? Why even show us two different altitudes for this? And again, you can see there's two VOR stations right here and right here. Besides Riley, because I know he knows it, or anybody else who has an IFR rating. Anybody else, any ideas of why they would give us two different altitudes on these chart? Why not just give us one altitude?
No idea.
Is it for line of sight?
Yep. All right. So the lower altitude, the minimum obstructions clearance altitude is only going to guarantee your obstruction clearance, obviously. So if you're in mountainous terrain, they're going to give you 2,000 feet of clearance from the mountains. And the other thing that they're going to guarantee with a MOCA is that you're going to get radio signal only within 22 nautical miles of the VOR station, right? So in this case, if this segment, let's say, is 64 nautical miles, right? If I only flew the MOCA, I'm not guaranteed radio signal between these VORs because there's a gap here, right? I'm only getting signal within 22 nautical miles of these VORs. That's what the MOCA is giving me as a guarantee. Whereas the MIA, because I'm at a higher altitude, not only am I getting the obstruction clearance, but I'm also getting guaranteed radio reception throughout the entire length of the route that I'm going to receive those radio signals.
So if you're flying GPS, you can fly the MOCA. If you're doing VFR or VORs, you should do the MEA.
Yep. And then we're going to talk about that because actually on the GPS routes, there's, and again, they're usually lower. You're going to notice on the GPS routes, they have a different altitude that's listed for them as well. But yeah, so if you're talking about VOR flying, like VOR to VOR on the Victor Airway, if you fly the MIA, you're guaranteed to get radio signal throughout the entire length of this altitude. Whereas if you're flying the MOCA, you're getting obstacle clearance, but you're only getting the signal within 22 nautical miles of that VOR station. So there could be a gap. Like I said, this segment is 64 nautical miles, so there would be a little bit of a gap if I flew the MoCA, around 20 something miles, that I would be missing the radio signal between these two VORs, which obviously is not good if I'm flying in the clouds, right? I want to make sure I know where the hell I'm going. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
So,
Yep.
So think about MoCA is going to be the one with the asterisk on the chart, right? So if I go back to the chart, if you look at that same one, so pop quiz, what is on Victor 171 on that example that I was using before, what is the MoCA altitude on Victor 171?
3,000.
3,000, right? And what does that guarantee me?
Obstacle avoidance.
And
Line of sight.
how far?
22 miles.
22 nautical miles to each VOR. So, right? So this VOR and that VOR are both going to give me 22. Now, if I want to be at the MIA, what altitude would I have to be at on Victor 171 for the MIA altitude?
10,000.
10,000. So you see there's a huge difference,
Huge.
right, between those two altitudes on this route. Whereas if I go down here, let's say for this Tango 325 route, right, if you see that's our RNAV route, and that's 2500 G, and the G means GPS. So that's going to be the altitude that I can fly. Obviously, I don't have to worry about radio signals because GPS is satellite based, right? So I'm, probably going to get a signal. So you could fly a lot lower at the, on the RNAV routes, right? So you notice I'm even lower than the 3,000 here on Victor 171, and I'm kind
What
of
if there's
within
only
the
What
same
if there's
jet.
only one number on a Victor airway, like the one right there, V305?
Then you're good to go. You can fly 2,700.
Regardless.
Yep.
Okay.
And then you'll notice there's another big number here, right? So what is this big 2 and a 6 here? And this is similar to a VFR chart. Anybody know why this tan number with the large 2 and a 6?
In that grid, the highest obstruction is 2,600 feet.
Yep. So that's going to be your Oroka, right? So Oroka is going to be, let's see, I think they have it over here somewhere. Where's our Oroka? And like I said, this thing is great because it kind of breaks it down, gives you the horizontal view. So your Oroka is your off-route obstruction clearance altitude, right? So if I decide that I'm going to go, if I decide I'm not going to take one of these airways to go between these two airports, right? I want to go off-route. So I'm just going to go, let's say in between these two. I want to make sure I'm not going to crash into anything, right? That's your Oroka altitude, which is 2,600 feet. So as long as I fly that or above, I'm guaranteed obstacle clearance because I'm off route. I'm not taking a published route to do that. And that's similar to your VFR charts, right? So if you look at your VFR chart, you'll notice something similar. Well, you'll have that big number and then the smaller number here in blue, and that'll be your highest obstruction plus some allowance for clearance. So it's a similar concept here on the world low chart. Obviously, on the world high chart, you're not going to have that because you're up so high anyway, right? You don't have to worry about obstacle avoidance. You're not flying, 5,000 feet. You're flying, 30,000 feet, 35,000 feet or something. So you don't have to worry about that. So they don't even publish the Oroka, on most of this. So those are your altitudes. Those are basically the main altitudes, right? There's more. I'm not going to go into them. I'm trying to keep it a little bit, simpler of what to remember. If you get overloaded with information, you're not going to remember all of it. So just remember MIA, right? So here's a perfect example here. Let me see if I can take a screenshot of this. And this was the difference we were talking about with the RNAV. Let me take a screenshot. Right. So here's a perfect example. So you had your MIA is at 4,500. Your GNSS, Global Navigation Satellite System, right, or GPS route, basically is 3,000. And then also on this Victor 138 as an example, your whatchamacallit, your Mocha was 3,000 as well, right? So these two are very similar because you don't have to worry about radio signal. But if I wanted to get guaranteed radio signal, I'd have to fly for the entire route. I'd have to fly it to MIA. Does that make sense so far, guys?
Yes.
Yes. All right. So let's do a little exercise. So let's take those two airports. And what are some routes that I could take between on the world low chart between Kilo Hotel Uniform Foxtrot and Kilo Sierra Delta Foxtrot? What are some possible routes that I could take to go between those two airports if I'm flying IFR?
I mean, certainly the one we just talked about, the Victor 171 airway.
Yep.
Is a good
Victor
choice.
171. All right, so if you pick Victor 171, we said we would tune to the 134 outbound radial here. If I wanted to switch over, let's say to the Louisville VOR as I get closer to Louisville Muhammad Ali International, what outbound radial would I be on for that one?
316.
Yep, 316, right? And again, if anybody doesn't know how to knows too much about VORs or a little rusty on it, the compass rose around the VOR will tell you, which radial you use, and then you just look, and then they calculated it for you already, 316. And remember, radials go outbound from the station, right? Kind of like the spokes of a bicycle coming out from the center. So this is the 316 outbound, right? Pop quiz, if I wanted to track this 316 radial inbound, what would I set my OBS to? If I want to track it inbound.
Minus 180, so whatever that is, 136.
Yep. So I'd take the reciprocal, right? Because that would put me this way, the opposite if I was tracking it inbound. Okay. Let's say I wanted to, let's see what we could do here. Let's take, trying to find some different airports here that got a little bit of a better. Let's say I wanted to go between.
Could you combine airways, like do a Victor airway and then a GPS airway in the same flight?
That's a good question. Riley, are you allowed to do that? I've got to ask one of the more real world guys.
Yes, you can. You can, in fact, convert.
You can switch between the two?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, I don't fly as much real world, so I wanted to ask one of the real world guys.
One thing, since I've managed to get my voice to work a bit, a couple things on Victor Airways and what you're doing. All right. If you look at the plan as written or as shown up there, it's going to be really hard to fly.
Right.
When you get down to Louisville, you got to do more than a 180. You see what I'm saying? It goes down and then it turns back around to come back out to where it goes. An alternate suggestion would be, all right, to avoid these steep turns, you're in the clouds and in the soup, okay? Plan yourself a different route. And what I'm saying is, and this is real world stuff, intercept the Victor Airway at Skodo. Sierra, Charlie, Oscar, Tango, Oscar. So you file HUF direct Skodo, Victor 171, and then get to Maze, Mike, Alpha, India, Zulu, Echo, and then go direct. What that does is it files you an easier route to fly, because if the controller at center in the middle of the night says cleared is filed, you're going to have to make two pretty sharp turns in the soup.
Yep.
And it's not real good.
Yep.
One more point about the whole subject of Victor Airways. There's somebody coming the other way on them too. Okay, they're not one-way streets. Keep in mind a number you need to remember. It's 4 miles either side of the center line of that airway. So when you're going, since nobody flies perfectly straight, keep right. Stay out to treat it slightly to the right of the center line going either way, and you don't run into each other should an altitude be off. Okay? That's it. My end of contribution, and my voice is shot. Phooey. Sorry.
No worries. Yeah, like I said, I definitely think this flight insight piece of it has a really good stuff. So if we're going to post this slideshow as well, but if you want, just DM me and tell me you want the link. If you want it like right after this presentation, they also have like a really good video about it too. Just DM me and just tell me you want the link, and I'll respond back with the link on here. And again, it's Mike D who's talking. Okay, so we got that. Obviously, you have your cruising altitudes, right? This is your collision avoidance piece. So just like when you have VFR cruising altitudes, right? Those you fly, let's say I'm going between 0 and 179. Again, this is for 1,000 feet AGL above ground level. If I'm going from 0 to 179, I file odd thousands plus 500, or I would fly odd thousands plus 500. So in this case, 3,500, 5,500. For your IFR cruising altitudes, it's going to be for that same 0 to 179 track, it's just going to be odds thousands, right? So now I'm flying 5,000, 3,000, 7,000, so on and so forth. So what you'll notice is actually you're getting 500-foot clearance between VFR and IFR traffic. So if you're in the clouds, right, somebody's in the clouds IFR, and then you're flying, let's say, VFR. If you fly the appropriate altitude, if you're above 3,000 feet AGL, you should have at least 500-foot clearance between the IFR traffic if you're flying VFR. And that's going to be your collision avoidance. And then again, what Al said too, around the center line, around the VOR, Victor Airways as well. You want to be careful of that as well and fly that. Does that make sense? Anybody have any questions? It's pretty straightforward. Yep.
I have a question.
Sure.
As far as that, off the center line, if you're flying autopilot, how does that work?
That's a good question.
It's going to try and fly right down the middle. The autopilot doesn't know how wide that is. It's going to try and go right smack down the middle, which means the guy coming the other way is going right smack down the middle.
But should be at a different altitude if he's
500 feet, which goes away pretty damn quick.
Like VFR, if you're IFR, you're 2,000 feet.
Yep.
So you got to hopefully.
No, you're one.
Yeah, sorry, you're 1,000. Correct. Yep.
Again, as I'm saying, I don't deal with the autopilot thing a whole lot, but I'm just saying, yeah, it's going to try and fly right smack down the middle. It don't know how wide the airway is. Again, I'm just trying to teach flying, not autopilot operations, but it's going to try. Another thing about GPS and RNAVs, your watch and your phone ain't IFR certified.
Yep.
The equipment has to be certified by the FAA. Everybody in the world's got a GPS in their phone. You can't fly with it legally.
And
you can't fly with it. You can't fly with it sensibly. It'll get you killed.
Can't imagine anyone doing that.
People do it every year. I read about them.
Yeah, can confirm.
Crazy.
That's a couple months ago, it has happened. Someone tried to fly approach into an airport with just their iPad. Don't do that.
That's crazy. Yeah, and obviously we take things for granted in the sim, right? We never have any failures generally, especially if you're flying a VAT sim. Nobody's using, or I don't even think you're allowed to use failures, within your Microsoft Flight Sim or X-Plane Sim, where some of your equipment's going to fail or anything. But, obviously in real world that happens. So you have to be careful of that stuff too. We kind of, I guess, get a little lazy and take it for granted in the sim that everything's always working all the time, so that's another consideration as well.
Well, the thing about it is a certified IFR certified GPS, if it loses its satellites, it's going to sit there and scream at you.
Yep.
Your iPad ain't going to do that. It just wanders off.
Definitely a good point. Cool. Yep. So we talked about this before, but again, just another way of looking at this. So here we have the Victor Airway. So remember MIA, you're guaranteed to signal across the entire route, and then the MOCA only within 22 nautical miles of the VOR stations. So again, there would be a gap in this example here if you were flying the MOCA, where you wouldn't get signal the entire length of your entire length of your route, but you would have obstacle avoidance. So your obstacle clearance is 1,000 feet unless you're in a designated mountain area, and then your obstacle avoidance clearance is 2,000 feet, right? So if you're flying the Mocha in a designated mountainous area, let's say like out west, right, you're guaranteed 2,000 feet of mountain clearance, and then you're only 1,000 feet if you're not in a mountainous area if you're flying the Mocha. All right, so we said that. So your Mocha and Aroka give you your obstacle avoidance. Your Mia is going to give you the reliable signal, and then your collision avoidance with other aircraft is primarily what Al said. You know, flying to the right of the route, as well as your appropriate cruising altitude for your IFR. The other thing we didn't talk about was crossing altitudes, which is MCA, minimal crossing altitudes. You're going to notice that on your charts here as well. Let me see if I don't know if I had an example here. So basically what's going to happen, actually, let me go here. So if you're going to cross between 2 points here, there might be if you notice like here in this example, right? They started out at a lower altitude here at 3,500, and then the aircraft had to climb up to a higher altitude up here at 5,500, right? So that's going to be a crossing altitude, right? Where you might have a minimum that you need to do with your crossing altitude. And then there's also another thing called minimum reception altitude. But again, I'm just trying to keep it a little bit more straightforward and simple, especially if this is your first time taking a look at this stuff. But if you want the full explanation, like I said, definitely look at this flight insight page. It's really good. Cool. Let's keep going. All right, so let's do this one. Let's say we were flying the A320 between Kilo Delta Foxtrot Whiskey to Kilo Mike Sierra Yankee, and we're flying above flight level 180. What are some possible routes and what are some possible altitudes that we could fly in that example? So Kilo Delta Foxtrot Whiskey, Kilo Mike Sierra Yankee. And remember, we're at flight level 180. So which chart are we going to use, the low en route or the high en route?
World high.
World high. Yep. So let's take a look at that. I'll give you guys a second to, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. This way I don't give away the answer. Let me stop sharing for a second while you guys are doing that. So take a look on Skyvector, see if you can work it out.
So it looks like there's a Jetway 58.
KD. Let me put it in. What did I say it was? KD.
KDFW.
FW. And what was the other one? Sorry.
KMSY.
KMSY.
Kilo Mike Sierra Yankee.
All right, so we got 388 nautical mile trip. All right, let me share my screen again. I'm sorry, who's that talking? Because I don't have it.
This is Brad.
Brad.
Sorry.
All right, Brad. Yeah, no, it's okay.
I'm just looking at that Jetway right above it. The Jet 58.
Jet 58. Let's take a look. Jet 58. Yep. Yep, and that's 162 nautical miles. It's a pretty straight shot.
I mean, it kind of goes up to the north a little bit, right? But it's pretty close.
Yeah, it's pretty close. Yep, you could use that one. I don't think we have any close. Oh, so here's the question. The question before. So like, if you notice to the north of it, J4 and Q184 kind of overlap each other. So that's where your VOR and RNAV route are actually overlapping. So just that was a good example. If you go to the north a little bit, J4 and Q184 are basically taking the same route on there. They're overlaid the same way. I don't think there's anything RNAV route that's close. Maybe this was a bad example that I picked.
So just sorry, can I digress? So to Al's point a little earlier, like the route automatically tries to take you to the VOR and then back to the route.
So the other thing, actually, we're going to get into that.
Can't you just intercept somewhere on that J route instead of going to the VOR?
So now we're going to talk about the next part of it. So you just led into the next part, which is good.
Okay, sorry.
All right. No, it's all good. So obviously you're not, there's a lot of traffic, let's say at larger airports, right? So you're not going to just willy-nilly, take off and just start intercepting things like the way that you want to do it. So there's two different things. There's SIDs, which are standard instrument departures, right? Which are basically predefined ways, predefined routes to get you where you want to go, which are already published. And then there's stars for the inbound portion of it, which are standard terminal arrival routes, right? And the purpose of these is this is to expedite traffic faster and also to cut down on the amount of ATC communication that needs to happen. So let's take, for instance, where we just are. Now, if you want to take a look, so Kilo Delta Foxtrot Whiskey is Dallas Fort Worth International. So if you click on the hyperlink in Skyvector, right, you'll get all of this information about the airport. But if you scroll down to the bottom, you're going to notice there's going to be SIDs and stars listed, and there's a lot of them here for these specific airports. Let me take our previous example because it'll be a lot less charts here. We're going to come back to this, but let me go back to my other example. This was this way it's less overwhelming. Kiloform Uniform Hotel to Kilo Delta KSDF. So this was my low en route example, right? What is that? No. Yep. So this was my world and low. So if I want to take off, I'm just using the other example that we had from the Terre Haute Regional, right? Let's see if there's anything here. Nope, of course not. Let's see if I have it this way. All right, so if I'm going into, so this is only going to have an example of a star, standard terminal arrival chart, right? So if I'm going into my Louisville Muhammad Ali International, this was using the world low example that we were using before. There's going to be published procedures already that are already created for us. Those are the stars here that are basically going to get us into the airport. And there's all different types of choices depending on where you're coming in from, right? So if I look at the Derby 8, the Derby 8 arrival here, right? This will take me, where am I? So this is going to take me into my airport, right? Using different basically like waypoints here, right? So if I go like to the Louisville VOR, right? Or there's different choices of like different entry points where you could do this. And basically it'll have like a map description here at the top. And the main thing you want to do is make sure you read the notes, right? The notes section is going to tell you specific equipment requirements that you're going to need, right? So if I want to do this London transition over here, I basically have to have DME, distance measuring equipment, within my aircraft, right? So I have to make sure my DME is there and working if I want to fly, let's say, to this London VOR and use this procedure to come in. And then the other part that it's going to have is basically going to have a text description of the route over here on the bottom, right? So if I was taking, let's say, this London transition, right, it's going to tell me what radial to fly to go to a specific waypoint. And then when I'm on that radial, then I'm going to go, and then when it says thence ... that means they all, follow up with this here, right? So basically you'll get a text description and then also a graphical description of the different arrival procedures. So if they tell you to do the Derby 8 arrival, this is basically the pre-published arrival that you would use, or you could file this as well to use the Derby 8 arrival as well, right? And then this is what it's called here, Derby Y8, right? And you could put that in Skyvector as well, and it should automatically route that onto your map. Did I lose Skyvector? Let me go back to it. Right, so it should automatically put that arrival procedure in there for me. Now, the opposite of what you have for that is SIDs, which are going to be standard instrument departures, right? So let's take the example, so KDFW to KMSY. So if I go to Dallas Fort Worth International, I'm going to notice that I have all these different types of procedures here at the bottom, which are going to be my standard instrument departures, right? So again, it depends also. So they're broken out, right? So if you're using RNAV, right, you're going to have all types of RNAV procedures here. So you'll notice that they have RNAV in parentheses. And then if you're not using, like, let's say an RNAV route like this Coyote 4, this is going to use more of VORs to do this. And let me just see if I can rotate this, right? So in this case, if I took off, again, these look really busy. If I take off basically from any of the north-facing runways, right, I'm going to turn to 270 to Farah, right, and then I'm going to follow all these different altitudes and, potentially go up here if this is where I wanted to go. Let's say my flight route took me more to the north. If I was going to go, let's say, more to the west for my route, right, then, potentially I would, try to take this potential piece over here. So it all depends on where you're trying to go as well. But again, these are standard things that are already published. So ATC knows about them. They're assuming you know about them, and then you follow these, and it basically cuts down a lot of the communication that's required because you're following a standard pattern that's already laid out for you. And again, read the notes. Just, takeoff minimums here, about your climb rate that you need to achieve. What to do if you're a jet. They're telling you to expect a worth departure. There's a lot of stuff going on these, so you really need to read these. Radar and DME are required to fly this procedure, this departure procedure. So again, you need to be careful. It's always going to have all of your communication frequencies up here on the top right of the plate as well. It'll have the name of it. So this is the Coyote 4 departure, and it'll give you the airport name as well. So you would use these in combination as well when you're planning out your route, if they're available, if there's a SID or a star available for that.
So when the controller clears your route, he'll tell you what SID to fly as the departure?
Or you file it. Yeah, you would file this, and as part of your flight plan, and then when they give you your clearance, they'll say cleared via the Coyote 4 departure, blah 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 blah. They'll tell you all that, or they'll say clear is filed if you filed this in your flight plan. So yeah, when they read back your clearance, does everybody know? Let me take a quick tangent. Does everybody?
Because I've heard him say fly the SID before.
When you depart and go over to departure, you're going to usually come off a runway at a busy airport, runway heading, or direct to a fix. After you talk to departure, he's going to tell you climb via the SID,
right?
Which presumes you're headed towards the initial fix. One other thing about this whole morass of airspace, because DFW is about as busy as any place in the world, but DFW is a perfect example for the symmetry of it. It operates off of corner posts, which are big VORs, okay? Inbound traffic, for example, from the Northeast, which is the primary arrival into Dallas, comes in over Bonham, Bonham.
Okay.
They go out. They head out towards Texarkana or north up towards Tulsa. It's a very symmetrical airspace, and that's him does it perfectly. I mean, they live by that. You will freak them out if you want to come into Dallas Fort Worth over one of their departures. He doesn't know how to handle you coming in over Texarkana very much. He's going to reroute you. but again, it's just the symmetry of it. Yeah, there's usually four ways into DFW and 4 ways out. MSY lakefront is usually primarily only 2 northwest and northeast arrivals because you can't get in from the south of it very well. But
yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Normally you'll fly runway heading climb maintain 5,000. He'll turn you over to departure. Once departure gets a hold of you, he's going to say turn left direct to finger or whatever, a given fix. You'll fly to that's on your departure. And when she got you on that heading on there, climb via the SID, and that gives you altitudes for step ups so that you don't interfere with inbound traffic going the other way. They start sequencing into Dallas, Fort Worth on a night coming in over Louisville and Arkansas. By the time they hit Bonham, which is 61 miles out from DFW Airport, you can look up that arrival and literally see them 5 miles in trail. It's all done by the time they get to Bonham.
Let's see. Yeah, I'm trying to. Actually, I was just going to my home airport, Essex County Airport. I was just trying to find one that looks a little less busy here, so you guys could.
I think Motown's got some really nice SIDs and stars into it, like Mike Uniform.
Okay, yeah, I'll take a second. So this is my home airport here. So for RNAV, and you'll see basically like there's 2 branches coming in, and like Al was saying, right, there's the altitudes that you need to fly during each part of this. Like if there's a holding pattern here, over by the VOR, and then you'll have all the different basically waypoints. So these are standard, right? So if it says, if I'm following the Jakey for arrival, right, depending on where I'm starting the arrival from, it's all published already. This is air traffic control knows this. You're supposed to know this going into it. And again, if you're using like a G1000 or something like that, all of this can be programmed into the flight plan as well, right? So it'll ask you like, when you're doing this arrival, what's your transition point that you're using, and then it'll load all the waypoints for you because again, this is a standard published procedure, right? Your G1000 or whatever flight computer you're using should populate this already for you because this is all known in here. So yeah, so I was just trying to pick one that was maybe a little less busy. And then what's going to happen is that star, right, is then going to feed into one of your approach procedures, right? So it's going to be like, that leg of it is then going to feed into the next leg, which would be, how do you actually do your approach and get on the ground there? So that they kind of tie together here. Just because in the interest of time, we're about an hour in. Let me see what else we had here. So airport information, right? So now we're flying into our destination airport, right? So not only do we have to worry about, all of our obstacle avoidance, our departure and approach types, there's some additional information, especially now for flying through cloudy weather and things like that we're going to need to know about, right? When we're flying IFR. We definitely want to know about, runway length, runway type. Main thing that's going to be very important, I should have put it on here, is runway lighting, and also, what kind of nav aids or aids that you have to help you get on the ground, right? Is there PAPI lights? What kind of runway edge lighting is there? Again, we take a lot of things for granted in the simulator because quote unquote everything always works. If there's any NOTAMs about any of that equipment that's not working, or if there's a runway closed, these are things in real world you want to check as well, right? Maybe the lighting is not working as expected, or the PAPIs are not working, or something. These things you would want to know in real world if there's obviously something that's going to affect your flight. So let's take a look at one of them. Let's take a look at let's take our low en route airport, Kilo Sierra Delta Foxtrot, right? So let's take a look. If you want to get the airport information, if you never did it before, Kilo Sierra Delta Foxtrot. What you could do is once you get on the hyperlink, you click on it, and then over here on the left-hand side, the top left, you're going to have what's called a chart supplement. And this is going to contain all of your information about the airport. You can see it is in a diagram form, and then also here on the left, you're going to get more of a text description of it. So let's say I was cleared and I'm going to fly into runway 35 right? So that's over here. Again, if you're a real world IFR pilot, maybe hold the answer to the end. So for those of us a little less experienced, what kind of lighting would I expect if I'm flying in crummy weather? What kind of lighting can I expect on 35 right as I'm making my IFR approach towards 35 right?
Well, you got a Pappy. I see that.
2 light or 4 light?
For 4.
And is it to the left of the runway or the right of the
To the
runway?
right. To the right.
Okay. Yep. So, and the way you can tell that from the diagram is the P with the circle around it right here where my mouse is. If you can see that, I think there's a way to highlight this on here. They change everything around. Yep. So the Pappy over here, that didn't work. Yep. So that's to the right of the runway. What other types of lighting do I have available that would help me flying in like lower visibility IFR weather? What other kind of lighting do I have on runway 35 right? Give you a hint. Those dashed lines kind of right before the runway.
I was calling rabbits, but I don't remember what the real name is.
Right. So there's the ALFS2. So it's kind of like similar to Mauser lighting, right? So basically what it's going to do is going to give you like a walkway basically to the runway, right? So this is well before you get to the runway, well before you're going to kind of see this trail of lights that's going to lead you right up to the runway threshold, right? So that's over here. And then again, that's in the text description over here. So if I was looking at runway 17 left, actually the opposite side, I'll have the Mauser, M-A-L-S-R. That would be up here. And that's depicted on the chart. It's going to give me my glide slope angle, right, which is 3 degrees. It's going to tell me I have a displaced threshold, which is kind of like this up and down symbol here, right where my mouse is, right? So that means I have a displaced threshold over here. So I need to land, forward of the displaced threshold, and that's 449 feet long. Okay. What other stuff? Obviously, airport remarks, are important too. Make sure that, for some of your smaller airports, right, you want to make sure that, there's a tower in use and what times that tower is in use or not. Again, in the simulator, we get a little spoiled, but, that's important information as well. So yeah, so that the length of our longest runway. So if I'm landing on 35 right, what is my usable distance that I can land at runway 35 right? How long is that runway for me to?
8578.
Yep, by 150 wide, right? So if I'm landing in a little Cessna, way more than enough runway to do that. If I'm landing an A320, you got to check your charts and everything and make sure that you're going to get the performance, and your roll is going to be, what you expected, right? If my runway was only 5,000, they're not going to land an A320 probably on that. So, those are the things you want to check. Some other lighting that you might see. I don't think this one has it. You might see HIRL. Oh yeah, here we go. HIRL on runways 17 left and 35 right. That's high intensity runway lighting, right? So those are your edge lights along the sides of the runway. Those are going to be high intensity, so they're going to be nice and bright and be able to see it. Yep. And then 11 and 29 has the high intensity runway lighting as well. Cool. Any questions? So again, this is the chart supplement. Super helpful, right? When you're doing your flight planning to get familiar with the airport that you're going to be landing at. So again, it's in chart form, and it's also in text form. And again, that's up here at the top left And the way you get to that, if you're in Skyvector, obviously Navigraph and other tools display this as well. You just click on the hyperlink to get all of that information. Okay. What else we got? We talked about nav aids, lighting, runway length, procedures. Let's see what else we got. And we'll talk about how to file this. Oh, let's talk about alternate airports, right? So when to file for an alternate. So if you're considering if you need to file for an alternate or not, just remember the 3-2-1 rule, right? So the destination airport that you're flying to, the visibility needs to be at least 3 statute miles, and your ceiling has to be at least 2,000 feet 1 hour before and 1 hour after your estimated time of arrival. If it's not, then you need an alternate. And then, generally you want to have your alternate, and you make sure your approach minimums are going to apply at your airport as well, right? Does everybody know what approach minimums are and where to find that information?
I know what they are. I don't know where to find them.
Okay, so if you're doing a specific approach, right? I'm just going to pick one randomly. Let me go to. So let's take. I'm going to take the same one, the Louisville Muhammad Ali International, right? So if I look at my approaches, let's say I do that ILS approach, right? So if I look at the approach plate here, what it's going to be broken down for different categories of aircraft, and this is broken down by approach speed. So categories A, B, C, and D, right? And then what it's going to do, it's going to have your minimums here, and also your visibility requirements, right? So for this one here, I have to have, so I can't have my cloud ceiling lower than 699 feet MSL if I'm going to plan on doing the 17 left approach, right? So if they tell me that the ceiling is going to be 400 feet, right, at this airport, right, that the cloud ceilings are 400 feet, obviously that's below minimums, and then I'm not going to be able to use that airport, right? I can't safely see the runway when I'm supposed to make my landing. And then if you'll notice, so ILS is a precision approach, right? Meaning you get lateral and vertical guidance. Whereas if you just use the localizer, right, you're only getting that lateral guidance, and you'll notice that your approach minimum are a lot higher, right? So this actually went from 699, it went up to 1,000 feet, right? And then if I'm doing a circling approach, the minimums are even higher than that. It's 1,040 feet, and I have to have at least 1 statute mile of visibility, right? So again, if it doesn't meet the minimums for the approach that you want to do, then you need to divert to your alternate. Because basically what you want to do is, as you're flying this approach, right, as I'm going in, I want to be able to see the edge of the runway, when I get to that point where I'm supposed to see it. And if I can't because the clouds are too low or something, then I need to divert, go mist, and then I'd have to go and potentially divert to my my alternate airport. Or you wouldn't even go here to begin with if you know it's below your minimums. Again, weather changes, things happen, right? So if you're below your minimums, then you would need to file an alternate as well. Make sense? Any real world guys want to add anything to that?
Just on the approach plate, since we're getting into the approach point or an approach plate for this, where does the approach for the ILS or localizer runway 17 left, where does it end? It's kind of a half tricky question, but it's great planning if you're going to actually fly an instrument approach. Answer is it ends at a little fix called TORAC, T-O-R-A-C. That's the missed approach fix. An instrument approach ends at the miss. If you happen to break it off and land visually, that's fine. but a whole lot of people have died because they didn't know what the hell to do when they got to the mixed approach point and they didn't see the runway, how to get out of there. So early on in your instrument training, somebody should beat you in the head and tell you the missed approach fix, and there always is one, is where the approach actually terminates. Your instructor and certainly your examiner will thump you in the noggin if you tell him it ends at Kelly or I Picky. Anyhow, just trivia. Go ahead.
It's good. No, it's all good. Yeah, and if you haven't seen an approach plate before, I wasn't planning on going into it in depth, but again, just a real 1,000-foot view of it, right? It'll tell you what type of approach you're doing. You'll see what type of lighting you have available. So there's a Mauser available. It'll tell you your equipment requirements here. And just like Al was saying, right, your whole missed approach procedure is basically here in text form in the top right, and it'll also be depicted here on the chart as well, right? So if I miss approach, right, I go down here to my minimum, right? Let's say I was doing the localizer, right, at 699, I should be able to see the edge of the runway. I don't for whatever reason, or I'm not configured or comfortable with the way I'm configured for my landing. I go missed, right? This little thing here is telling you your missed approach. And then basically you have it here in graphical form. And then you have it up here, missed approach in text form, right? I'm going to climb up to 1600, make a climbing left turn to 4000, right? So graphically it's depicted here the same way. And then I'm going to go to Torak and hold. And that this is basically saying the same thing. Go to Torak and hold. And then you're going to notice it's right up here as well. Another depiction of your missed approach procedure. The actual procedure to go in and fly the ILS or the localizer approach is here, right? So these are all your different waypoints, right? You have Thund, Racer, and then also here, it's going to have the altitudes, right? So this is, I need to fly above 5,000. I step down to 4,000 and I intercept, if I'm flying the ILS, I intercept my localizer, I'm sorry, the ILS at 2,500, the lightning bolt symbol over here, right? So, and then graphically on the left, right, that same stuff we talked about in the chart supplement, where the PAPI lights are, what kind of lighting I have available, the kind of general layout of the runway is all going to be here on your left-hand side. So again, looks really busy, but there is a logic and an outline to it. So it's all kind of going to follow a standard pattern, right? All your equipment requirements, all of your communication frequencies are all going to be up here at the top, missed approach procedure and lighting available. And then basically graphically, top-down view and sideways view of your whole procedure is going to be in these two charts up here, right? They're just showing this, different slices of the same thing. This is top-down, and then this is the vertical view of it. And then over here is a picture of your airport as well. Okay. Fuel minimums, right? So obviously if you're going to have an alternate, right, or even without an alternate, fuel minimums, you have to have enough for your destination. And then if you're doing an alternate, and then 45 minutes at normal cruise speed, right? So it's enough fuel for your destination plus your alternate, and then an additional 45 minutes at normal cruise. Okay. And then climbing performance as well, right? You have to make sure, based on the category of aircraft that you're using, there's certain performance that you need in terms of climb performance to be able to do some of these procedures as well. So you want to make sure that you always check that and be familiar with enough with your aircraft to make sure that you can get the necessary climb performance out of it as well.
If you happen to get lucky enough to come out of DFW in your Cessna, look really carefully and make sure you don't have a jet SID file, because you can't climb like that airplane and you're going to get in trouble and you're going to get vectored to places you didn't even know existed.
And the other thing really around climb performance as well, anybody besides real world pilots, can anybody explain density altitude? Because for me today in the Northeast, today is a perfect lesson about density altitude in New Jersey Anybody besides real world pilots, anybody define what density altitude is?
Oh, me.
Okay. All right, besides real world guys. Or I'll ask the question differently. How is density altitude or changes in density altitude, how does that affect my aircraft performance? All right, I'll tell you what. I'll give you guys a leading question on this. Again, not the real world guys, so the other people. So today it is 95 degrees in lovely New Jersey, right? Do you think my climb performance will be better or worse if I took off today at 95 degrees outside air temperature versus if I took off on a standard day, with air temperatures of 59 degrees Fahrenheit? Do you think I would have better performance at 95 degrees Fahrenheit or less climb performance at 95 degrees Fahrenheit? Anybody who thinks I'm going to get better climb performance at a 95 degree Fahrenheit day, say yes. All right. Anybody who thinks that I'm going to get less performance on a 95 degree day, say no.
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 No. All right. Everybody should be saying no, right? So remember, air flowing over the wings and air getting, the propeller biting into the air, for lack of a better term, right, is what determines your aircraft performance. So when air gets heated, right, the density of it decreases, the air molecules spread apart, so that I have less air flowing over my wings and less air that the propeller is biting into. Therefore, I'm not going to get as good a performance out of the aircraft. When does that happen? On a very hot day like today in the Northeast, right? We got a heat wave going on. I think most of the country does, right? You're going to get different performance about it because your POH is when they do the calculations and stuff, you read your POH, they base it off of a standard day, right? Which at a certain altitude is a certain temperature. I could definitely tell you today at 95 degrees here in New Jersey is above standard day, by a couple of factors above a standard day. So I'm going to get a lot less climb performance out of my aircraft. Okay, so that's that whole concept of getting less performance or more performance based on the air temperature is called density altitude. So even though I'm pretty much almost at sea level at my own home airport here in New Jersey on a 95 degree day, if I take off, my aircraft might perform as if I was already up at, let's say, 2,000 or 3,000 feet of altitude, right? So I'm not going to get that climb performance that I thought I was going to get. So again, that's another thing, we could get a little spoiled with in the sim, right? We don't need to necessarily factor that in sometimes, but you should, and you should be aware of it, especially if you're flying at airports, at higher elevation, or like I said, if the day is a, a non-standard day, where you're going to get different performance out of your aircraft. So definitely want to take that into account. Does everybody know how to file a flight plan on VATSIM, or do you want to go through it really quick? Or is that, I'll tell you what, even better. How about, why don't we do this as audience participation? Somebody who feels brave, why don't you file, let's say, Kilo Hotel Uniform Foxtrot to Kilo Sierra Delta Foxtrot. How about you walk me through how I would do that on VATSIM? So we'll make this audience participation. Let's say I'm filing my flight plan. I don't know if it's going to let me do it. Yep. Let's see if it'll let me file my flight plan. So I'm not actually going to hit the file button, but we'll fill everything out. So my call sign, I'm TPC 1079er. So again, if we're flying IFR, a flight plan is required. If we're flying VFR, it's optional. It's a good idea to do it on VATSIM, especially if we're doing a big group flight. But for IFR, it is required. Aircraft type. So if I'm flying a Cessna 172, I'm going to be a Charlie 172. My weight category, because I'm a smaller aircraft, I'm going to be a lightweight category. Equipment code. Anybody know what equipment code? Again, not real world pilots. The other guys. Anybody know what the equipment codes are for? Or
Yeah,
what some of my choices?
What equipment you have on board, if you have GPS or if you have ADF, what radios you have on board and stuff like that.
Okay, so yep, if I use GPS, let's say I'm GPS equipped, I'm not sure if they use the slant anymore. It should be slant golf on that. My departure airport is going to be, I'm sorry, I don't know why I can't remember these letters. KHUF. So I'm going to go back. KHUF. Right. We'll come back to some of this. My airspeed is going to be about 115. It's my true airspeed. And my arrival airport is going to be Kilo Sierra Delta Foxtrot. Right. So Kilo Sierra Delta Foxtrot. My alternate. So again, if I had to pick an alternate based on the 3-2-1 rule, I would put it in there. So the other thing they want to know, right, is going to be your fuel endurance and your en route time, right? And again, this is to make sure you are where you say you're going to be when they expect you to be there. Otherwise, they would, obviously, start looking for you. So if you're a fully loaded Cessna, let's say with full fuel, I'm going to have, let's say, about 4 hours of normal cruise. And let's say, I think this one was only, let's say, about, I think it was like 100 nautical miles. So let's say an hour at most, right? So I put 1 hour. So again, determining based on the, what altitude I'm going to fly at. So why does somebody tell me if I'm doing Kilo Hotel Uniform Foxtrot to Kilo Sierra Delta Foxtrot, what would be my altitude if I was flying one of those routes that we talked about before? This is the world.
In order to hit the proper clearances, you'd need to be at 11,000.
What am I at? Kilo. I don't know why.
Hotel Uniform Foxtrot.
Sorry, I don't know why I can't. It's been a long day. Kilo Hotel Uniform Foxtrot, and what was the other one?
Sierra
Delta
KSDF. Yep.
Got it.
You're flying west, right? Which one is KHUF?
Let's world low. So
sorry, you're flying east. Yeah.
Right. So that would be odd thousands, right?
Yep.
And then the other thing, remember, I got to take a look at what airway I'm going to fly potentially, right? So if I was taking the Victor airway, right? If I was doing Victor 171, I also have to look at my altitudes, right? That I have to fly. So I would have to fly, if I'm doing the Mocha, right? I'd have to fly above 3,000, right? I can't file lower than 3,000 if I want to make sure I'm going to have obstacle avoidance. That's a bad example. Let's do this. We're gonna mix this up a drop. Let's say we were doing this one. What airport is this? KEVV. Let's mix it up a drop. We're gonna do KEVV. We're gonna go into Evansville Regional. How's about that? And then this way we can use the RNAV route as well. So if I was going into Evansville Regional, right? Let's do that. Terre Haute Regional to Evansville Regional, because this will give us a couple choices of different routes, right? What are some different routes I have to go into KEVV? Because we'll use that one because I got a couple choices here I could use.
You could use the Victor 7.
It's all right. So if I'm doing Victor 7, right, I'm basically flying
4,500.
Remember, it's odds.
Yep.
Odd thousands, right? So yeah, we could. All right, so we can file. Let's say we want to file. So we just have to be 4,500 or above, right? So let's file 5,000, right? So
well, you're kind of flying west, dude. So it should be evens.
Oh, I'm sorry, evens. Yes,
Yep.
Evens. Sorry. So we can file 6,000. Sorry, it's getting late at night. We'll file 6,000. What else did we fill out here? And then the off block time, right? That's going to be the time that basically I'm, going to be taking off and doing all my stuff. So that would be basically like the time that you're going to start doing what you need to do. So you would figure that out, obviously, in Zulu time, UTC time. And then the route details, right? So if I was doing this, I would say, which one was that? It was Victor
7.
Victor 7, right? So I want to file that on here as well, Victor 7. And then if I'm following any stars and SIDS, right, I want to put that in here as well. So let's see if we're doing any of that. Right, so those should be here as well. So Terre Haute, let's see. if there's anything that puts us. All right, so there's no procedures that are listed here for Terre Haute in terms of stars or SIDS, right? So it's a smaller airport. So maybe I want to file, maybe I'd want to go up to the VOR here, which was this one here. What's the name of this VOR? HUF? No, that's the airport there. TTH, right? So this is what I want to file here. So I'm going to fly to the VOR, take Victor 7, and then let's see if Evansville Regional has any star procedures that we need to be aware of. Nope, they don't either. All right, so this is basically what I'd file right here. Right, I'm going to fly to this VOR, TTH. I'm going to take Victor 7, and then I'm going to fly down to this VOR. Right, and then obviously as I get closer to the airport and I listen to the ATIS or talk to the controller, then they're going to give me what approach I should expect over here at Evansville Regional. Right, there's a couple different types of approaches that I can get, either ILS approaches or RNAV approaches, right, depending on which runway I'm going to use, and the controller, would tell me that. Or when I believe this airport has, let's see if they have ATIS. If they have ATIS, they should tell
Hey,
us
Mike,
also on it.
I have
Yes.
a question.
Sure.
Sorry. When we're trying to like manually figure out what route we should take, should we always consider the arrival path so that we know what's the last waypoint to take?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, you definitely want to know, yes, your arrival path on what it is, because then basically what it's going to do, it's going to transition. So these two airports are a little bit smaller, they're regional airports, so they didn't have like stars or SIDS published. But generally what's going to happen is you'll get to like a waypoint, and then they'll have a transition point between that, right? That'll basically take you, from that star or SID, right? Let's say from the SID, right? So if I do it here, the SID would take me out to, let's say, a specific waypoint, and then I could catch that waypoint to take the rest of my route. And then eventually there'll be usually a waypoint or a VOR or something where that I would intercept that, and that would follow the star procedure going into the next airport. So yeah, so you'd have to look at all that stuff and plan that out, and then obviously file that as part of your flight plan.
Gotcha. I haven't considered the SIDS or the stars. I normally would try and just get the closest waypoint to the airport, but that makes sense.
Yeah, and so like these two airports, right? So if you're flying like GA aircraft, it's smaller, kind of these two regional airports, right? There's really no stars and SIDS in this example that I took, right? So I don't necessarily need to consider that. I just would want to see what I want to set myself up for, for the approach. But yeah, at larger airports, definitely where there's a lot more traffic, definitely your Bravos, probably your Charlies as well, your Class Charlies are going to have stars and SIDS that are going to be published. This wasn't the only route that I could have took, right? This Victor 7. So I kind of just took this example because there's another route that I could have taken here as well. If I wanted to take this Tango 325, I could use that as an RNAV route, right? So I could have took Tango 325 here. And then basically what it does, it's giving me, which waypoint do I need to intersect, right, to get on Tango 325, which would be Jibka and then Apollo. Right? And so if I was taking the RNAV route when I file my flight plan, then I would use that as the route details. Right? If you're just going direct, right? Like let's say you were going off route, right, where you're not using a published route like we're using, then you can just put in DCT or just list the waypoints there as well. And that's it. That's how you would file your IFR flight plan. This other stuff we don't necessarily need to worry about. And then you just obviously click File Flight Plan, which I'm not going to do. And that would file it on VATSIM. And then when you talk to the controller, the last point I'll make, basically the order that you want to talk to your controllers when you're flying IFR, if your airport has it, right, you're going to talk to clearance delivery first. If there is no clearance delivery, then you would talk to your ground controller, right? And then what you're going to do is you're going to tell them, you want to fly IFR to your destination airport, using the 5 Ws that I mentioned before about ATC communication, and they're going to give you basically it's called a craft clearance. They're going to read that back to you. They're going to tell you where you're cleared to, what route you're supposed to take, what altitude to fly, what frequency you need to tune into, and then because you're flying IFR, they need to know where you are at all times and identify you, so they're going to give you a specific transponder code, right? So if I filed, let's say, let me file this one. If I file this, right, and this is going to Evansville Regional, I'm just putting it here so I can see it, right? I would tune to my clearance delivery and then say, I'm requesting IFR to Evansville Regional. And then when they read it back to me, they're going to say cleared to Evansville Regional. The R, that's the C, right? So that's my clearance. The route that they're going to give me is they're going to say, as filed, or they're going to say JIPCA, Tango 325 Apollo. They're going to tell me my altitude that I need to fly. So let's say in this case, let's say they gave me the altitude I filed. So they're going to say 6,000, right? So they're going to tell me my altitude is 6,000. Frequency, right? That's usually going to be your departure frequency. I'm just going to make it up, 123.5. And then they're going to say squawk. I'll just put transponder here, right? They're going to tell me the squawk, I don't know, whatever the code is, 9876, right? Obviously, you're going to read that back to them, and then you're going to follow those directions, right? So that's your clearance. That's the route that you're cleared to. So you're not supposed to deviate off of that route unless you communicate that to ATC, like let's say if you had an emergency or the weather, turned on you too bad or something. But this is, ATC always wants to know where you are. So this is what they're expecting from you. This is what altitude they expect you at, and they want to be able to see that your transponder code, when they look on the radar scope, they know it's you. So they're going to give you a craft clearance, basically after you file your IFR, and this is how you're going to communicate with them. Any questions, comments, concerns? I hope this was somewhat helpful.
Hey, Mike. Have you experienced or anyone that has actually deviated from that route because of weather? I'm assuming because they're usually at high altitudes that they may be overpassing the weather.
So yeah, so weather, I mean, it happens. So weather, I didn't talk about it as much. There's basically 2 places you can get weather. If you're using, again, live weather in the sim, you could go to aviationweather.gov, which is kind of the, one of the quote unquote official ways to get weather. The site I actually use that I like a lot better, I think it's a little bit more streamlined, is 1-800-WX-BRIEF. You can sign up for basically a free account. Let me see if I remember my password.
Just don't file through it.
Yeah, don't file through it, but you could use it to look up your weather. Let me see if I have a history, planet brief, pilot history. Yep. So what I like about this is this kind of takes everything and puts it into one neat package for you, right? So to give you your flight plan summary, again, don't look at this flight. This is a different one than what we're talking about. But basically, if you look at the table of contents, it gives you everything, right? Your SIGMETs, your AirMets, your METARs, your synopsis, all your forecasts, any NOTAMs that are, applicable to you as well. And you basically just get everything right here in one nice package, right? So if you want to start high level to lower level, this is kind of the high level weather trends for this day, and you basically go through, this is every airport along my route and their conditions, whether they're VFR, marginal IFR, marginal VFR or IFR. It gives you all the METARs here. So I like this better than aviationweather.gov because you get like this basically, I like to call it like a full like briefing package, of the weather here. You're going to get your winds aloft forecasts, like everything is here. It's a lot of information, but when you just kind of see, what you need to pick out, from it. You don't have to read 300 pages of it. But I like it because it's graphical. It gives you the information, and it just kind of does it in like a top-down kind of way to do that. So if you haven't used it before, yeah, I would definitely highly recommend 1-800 Weather Brief. And then any of the NOTAMs, again, more real world, if some equipment was out of service or a runway was closed or something, that's going to be here as well. If any temporary flight restrictions, right, presidents in town, and the area is closed off or something, that all that'll be listed is here as well. So, yeah, I think it's a great tool to use.
Interesting thing about VATSIM and VATSIM Online, when the weather is bad someplace, they sometimes don't make it real world. In other words, if there's horrible storms over Houston, then nobody would be able to fly in and out of Houston, and they don't do that.
Yeah,
What they'll do is they will make the weather something less than real. The best way to find that out is in vPilot. I believe there's a command called .wx followed by the airport identifier, which gives you what VATSIM thinks about the weather. Because like today, there wouldn't be anybody in VATSIM land flying in and out of Houston if they had good sense, because Intercon was on a runway stop for hours.
And this 1-800 Weather Brief, like this is if you want to plan in advance. Again, a little bit more real world, right? Like, I know we get a little spoiled. We just jump in the sim, we fly, we adjust the weather, or, we kind of work around it. But if you were doing this more real world and you want that, 24-hour in advance forecast, and you're really doing, correct, quote unquote, correct weather planning, this is the way you would do it. So again, it's a little bit more, real world versus, flight sim, VATSIM land. But it's good to be aware of it as well. Good. Any other questions, comments, concerns? So if you were wondering, there's a reason I picked those two airports. So the original airports that I picked, the Kilo Hotel Uniform Foxtrot, Kilo Sierra Delta Foxtrot, using your low and route chart. If you do the Discovery flight next weekend, the 29th, that's actually going to be the airports we're going to fly. So if you want to fly at VFR, you can fly at VFR if you want. If the weather's bad enough, or you want to practice doing an IFR and want to file an IFR flight plan, the controllers are going to be ready to handle it either way. So I already gave them a heads up that some people will be flying IFR as well, even if it's VFR conditions. Again, just to practice. Those Discovery flights, if you haven't been on them, that's the place to quote unquote make mistakes, try things out. The controllers are more than patient. They know it's a newer crowd, or people, trying to, shake the cobwebs off and get better at their skills. So they're not going to be as strict, let's say, as they normally would be. It's a lower amount of people during the event. It's basically just us, right? So that's the place to try things, make mistakes. If you're not confident with your ATC communications, or never, did IFR type communications for over ATC, I would definitely highly recommend the Discovery flight is the place to work out the kinks and try it. So again, that'll be next Saturday, June 29th, starting at 8 p.m. Eastern time. And again, we're going to fly the low and route portion of this. So you can do your flight planning. You don't have to take the route that I took, or if you want to, work on your own flight planning. That's purposely, I didn't put the flight plan up on the website because I'm expecting you to take a look at it. It kind of goes along with this workshop as well. So cool. Any other ending comments? Any of the real world guys? Any other ending comments or nuggets of wisdom, things to look out for?
I got some after we break up. So
okay, cool. All right, guys. If nobody's got anything else, then I'll let you guys jump off. We'll be putting this recording up somewhere on the website, so you can always refer to it later. And like I said, keep tuned later for additional workshops. If anybody has any suggestions or any topics that you're really curious about that you'd like us to do in a future workshop, feel free to DM it to me or, put it in one of our channels, and we'll definitely try to get that situated in a workshop as well. So thanks everybody for joining. And if there's no other comments, I'm going to close out the event and stop the recording.
Thanks, Mike.
Yep, no problem. Have a good one, guys. Let me.
Thanks.